Okay, this is a Compur-Rapid shutter, which is part of a Jenna Tesser 2.8 lens and was removed from a Zeiss Iconta B 532/16 camera. I'm doing my first CLA, clean, lube, and adjust on a lens, and I'm having some problems with this one. Okay, I have had this shutter apart several times working on it, and as you'll notice, the aperture is working fine. It is one of the items that wasn't working before I took the shutter apart, and it is freely moving from open to closed, and no problems there whatsoever. The aperture is set to B right now, and what should occur there is that the aperture freely opens and closes, which it does. However, if you will notice, it does not open fully. This is problem number one. Then when you move, we'll adjust this to, let's say, 1/2 a second right now, cock the shutter, and when it is tripped, you'll notice two things. Number one, it stays open, the aperture, and number two, once I close it by pushing it along here just a little bit, well, it did snap back. About half the time, the arm here that trips the shutter does not pop back. Let's move this up to about 1/50th of a second. Set the aperture, trip the shutter, and you'll notice that it seems to function fine there. I don't really know if the timing's correct yet, but it does function fine. Then come all the way up to 1/400th of a second. It obviously is more difficult to set the shutter, and then when it trips, it seems to work fine. Also, one last thing, let's set it back down to, let's say, the 50 again. Cock the shutter, then hold the delay down so that the shutter cock goes to the second notch so you can have the self-portrait delay. And let's trip the shutter, and you'll see that it is working. It takes about 20 or 22 seconds for it to trip and work and function correctly. So as of right now, that's what the issues are with this shutter being back together. It is odd that I'm not having any roughness in the linkage that trips the shutter right now. I was before, but I'm not right at this moment. What we'll do now is I'll take the shutter back apart somewhat and show you exactly what appears to be occurring on the inside of the shutter right now. Okay, we have the faceplate off the shutter, and you can, the speed ring is still on, and you can see into the shutter here. I'm going to set the shutter, well, it is set to B for bulb, which means that the shutter should open and shut freely. I'm trying to hold down the speed ring here so that it won't pop up and not function correctly. Okay, you'll notice that it's working freely. Now I still have the same issue, it's not opening up fully, the aperture, but it is working freely. Now, when we move off a bulb, I'm going to set it on 1/50th. What you should have is the shutter release should not function in any way. In other words, it doesn't release the shutter, it just moves back and forth. But you'll notice there's a hitch in there now. When you depress the shutter release, it will not return without forcing it back. Okay, you start to depress it about right here. There's a little bit of pressure. I can overcome the pressure and fully open the release, but then it sticks and it has to be pushed back. Now, it often does that when I put it back together too, so I wanted to make sure you noticed that. Now I'm going to go ahead and cock the shutter. This whole time I'm holding down on the speed ring because I don't want it to slip off of any of the functions that it has there to allow the shutter to work correctly. And when I release the shutter, it seems to function fine, except as you can see, the release does not return. It was held there, and you have to kind of overcome it to get it to return again. That's the issues we seem to be having. I now have the speed ring off, and you'll notice you can see right into the shutter. Now the cocking ring is still on and still pressed down so that it correctly connects all the parts it needs to around the shutter. I'm not going to try to trip the shutter in this condition because I'm sure parts will fly around in the wrong way. But what I'm going to do is it simulates it being in the bulb position, and I'm going to open and shut the shutter a few times to give you an idea of how all of the parts down here in the linkage for the shutter release are functioning. You'll notice that it does open the shutter and shut it, and all seems to be working well. But when it is cocked, there is issues with that linkage. So just food for thought here, so I can hopefully obtain some feedback on what others think the issue might possibly be.